Hey, welcome back to my channel. It's been the first video in a long while. My last video about the plans for April was the last one that I put up here. But those plans didn't actually work out the way that I wanted them to. So I had very little time during April and most of May to work on the shadow and to finish the storage area that I announced back then. But I'm back to it, and I want to give you a quick update on what has happened in terms of graphics. I'm pretty much halfway through the assets that I need for the new level type. But this video is a little bit more about optimization and how I approach optimization to make the game run smoothly on lower-end PCs. So first of all, let's take a look. We have a couple of elements here that are new. A couple new light elements, or lighting elements rather, that I will implement in those storage facility levels. We have a couple of storage sections here. Those are modular and can be extended as much as I like them to. The doors, different platforms, and everything here is designed in a way that it looks slightly older and is color-coded to a facility that is reminiscent of the orange droid, the delivery droid, and that is where this whole level comes from. These facilities were actually run by the government and government employees before everything was automized and run by the droids or robots. This is one very early version of a droid running on rails that are not implemented yet, and these things basically carry goods from A to B and back again and then deliver them to the citizens of the big city. So this is now being used solely for storage purposes, and it's not very well maintained, hence the slight rusty look in most of the parts of this level. I have to create new smaller lighting elements yet. Those are the ones from the laboratory levels, which, as you might remember, look far cleaner and more modern because they have been constantly upgraded. Okay, so that's that on the background of the storage level facilities in the shadow. And yeah, there's far more to come. I've got a couple of models ready, not textured yet. I'm in the process of doing that. Now that I've picked up the development of the shadow to a much more thorough daily routine. And yeah, so optimization. So in game development, it's always important that you try to optimize your 3D models, your graphics and everything, so that they still look good, but they don't impact the real-time rendering process as much. Lighting, like using baked lights, reflections and everything all come into play at some point, and everything has to be taken into account for each frame that is rendered. So if you want to reach something between 50 to 60 frames on a low-end PC, you have to kind of plan ahead and think about which objects are actually your so-called hero models, the important ones that are close to the camera, for instance, and need a lot of detail and a lot of sophisticated materials, and others that are basically only background objects that are not that important, but should look good anyway. So in this case, with the walls for the levels and the background elements here, you can see that my approach is a very modular one. And especially for these support structures here that build the frame around, for instance, the storage elements in the back here, and give the level a little bit more depth. There will be others that go further in, but the principle basically stays the same. So these elements are to separate these sets from each other and make the level walls plus other elements a little bit more versatile and interesting, not just bland planes with textures. So in this case, if I would go about texturing and adding materials to them like most people do, then this would cost quite a bit of performance, because for each and every, if each and every element here had a separate material, I would need, and a separate texture, I would have already quite an impact on the overall performance, because every single element would need to be rendered separately and not in one go by batching, or what we call batching, where when elements have one single or the same material, a game engine can usually say, okay, I render this all in one go. So that is the goal here that I followed, especially with these elements, with the beams here and the lights. These are all run using one material and one texture. Textures are important because if you go like with a resolution of 2K or 4K, that makes sense. But if you use that texture on a very small object, you will not see that detail. So you wouldn't need a very high resolution texture for that. However, for these larger elements, it makes sense, even if they're always slightly further away from the camera, to use a higher resolution texture. That needs to be loaded once and not 5 different or 6 or 7 different textures or texture sets for 5 or 6 different models. We have 6, 7, 8, 9 other support structures here. All of these use the same material and the same texture. Hence, a lower level file size, quicker loading times, and a much easier rendering process through in game mode, in plane mode. So how do I go about this? I see this as a tip for beginners, for instance. So bear with me when I explain how I go about it and why this game still on a GT 1050 Ti on a laptop runs with 50 to 60 frames in Unity's HDRP version. So I usually plan ahead quite a bit when I create my model sets, optimizing for this very purpose. So let's take a look into Blender here, and these are the level sets, or the tile, the model, the 3D tiles that I use for that particular structure that you just saw with those white lines and the blue light elements. So I built these with that principle in mind, that I want these elements to all work on one texture and one texture set, sorry. The textures with texture set, I mean the color texture, albedo or base texture, depending on what your shader model is. The emission texture, the metallic and smoothness and ambient occlusion texture, and or effects textures. Then again, depending on which game engine you use, that differs. I'm using Unity's HDRP, and then obviously the normal maps for more lighting details and things like that. So, and the first thing that is really important to make that work is to actually have these guys have the same UV layout or corresponding UV layout, so that they use the same parts of a texture that I then create later. So let's take a look at that. Let's select them all, and here you can see this looks kind of messy. There are parts there. These are actually 3 these are UV layouts for 3 different materials. So deselect all. When you look at these objects, you can see that they all use 3 different materials. One is the support structure material, then we have the standard bottom wall, and then we have a new one that I implemented just quickly because I needed 3 of these. So the way this works is that I wanted to make sure that I can have a texture on a wall tile here and one on a wall tile to the right, and then use the same material on this object on either side to make the wall here, the wall tile here, line up with that edge over here. Let me just go back into Unity to illustrate that. This is this example here. So I have this object and there's the wall tile with this texture. So if I put a different material on here, you can see that that doesn't match up. So what I do is I use the same material on this part, and then on the other side here, I can use something different to make them match up in the middle. And then obviously we have the main material for the overall support structure that is different than the wall tile textures. Okay, so back to Blender. And the way this is set up is that I use these materials and arrange the materials for the UV coordinates, sorry, for the different materials that I need. So these two need to match up with the UV layout that I use on the wall textures, on the general wall tiles. Hence, you get. Let me quickly select these. And so you get these elements here. And the main texture, let me just quickly select the tiles that are assigned to that. These are now, for this element here, the corresponding UV coordinates. Now if I select all of these, and select the support material assigned faces, you can see how these all correspond to each other and overlay where they need to. And so all of these have been laid out so that I know when I draw something here, it will be painted on here, and so on and so forth. That's obviously the wrong texture in the background there, but you get the gist of it. Okay, so that helps a lot with reducing what in Unity is called a draw call. So for all of these here, especially because they are static objects, for all of these now, the renderer can just go over them once per layer in the texture, in the material rather. Sorry. So what we have here are materials that have specific layers, specific texture layers or texture slots, like for the base map, for the metallic and smoothness and ambient occlusion masking, the normal map and the emission map. And instead of now having 6 or 7 different materials, I have the freedom now to use one and have the system see this as one structure and render it in one go per texture level, which reduces the amount of draw call significantly. And that gives you, that frees a lot of rendering time and and increases the performance of the game overall. The same is true for these elements here, as I said earlier. And let's take one over here. So these elements all use the same material and texture setup as well. And of course have been also aligned regarding their UV unwrapping so that they can use one texture. For these I use textures that are have a resolution of 2K. That is definitely more than enough. I don't need to go higher because these are further away from the camera anyway. And they work actually quite nicely. Let's take a look in what they look like in play mode. And so here you see the character, the level layout, by the way. This is not the final level layout. I used these test levels to test the lighting, test the materials and everything, and how everything comes together before I actually build the levels themselves. So as you can see, this works quite nicely. Luckily the droids are not working on this part of the level because that would make things a little bit more difficult to show you. And the game runs still super smooth, even though I have already a couple of effects in here, like volumetric lighting, which is not super strong in this one. I will add a little bit more volumetric fog, which is in here, but make it more dense. And this is working out quite nicely. I'm pretty happy with the 3D effect that those support structures give. They give the level a little bit more three-dimensionality. And with the other elements that are still in the works, this will look actually quite nice and interesting. I'll add a few more colors to the walls here in order to give the player a good idea on why this was, or there we go. Sorry about that. That the player gets a better idea of what the structure actually was. But so far, and this will look like a little bit more like the areas that you already see here with the orange indicators and orange colors and a few other elements, color elements and color coding, so that this will be immediately recognizable as a storage facility level when the player sees it. Okay, yeah, I hope you found this interesting, and I hope I get to do a lot more texturing over the next couple of days and show you a few more elements and design aspects of this level type, and build a little bit more, one little bit larger one where you can see a couple of new elements and why these levels will be pretty interesting for the player. And I will also explain a little bit more on what happens in these levels and what these levels are for. Okay, cool. Thanks for your time. Hope you liked it. Like, subscribe, and share. And if you have any questions about this process of optimization for the 3D objects and the materials, then drop me a comment below. Cheers, guys, and until next time.